Hey everyone, and welcome to the Patriot Party. Today, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Alex Kocman. Alex serves as a Director of Communications and Engagement at ABWE, Association of Baptists for World Evangelism, a global mission organization founded in 1927, working in 84 countries. He's a contributing writer for Nine Marks, the Gospel Coalition, and Founders Ministries, and brings a sharp perspective on how faith, truth, and culture intersect in American life. Alex, it's great to have you on the show. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you. It is good to be here. So I do have the great privilege of serving with this global organization. We've got about 1,000 missionaries serving in 91 countries. And so it's just exciting to hold the rope for them and to kind of stand at the nexus of the church and not only our culture, but the cultures abroad, and trying to bring the message of Christ to bear in all those places. I'm a churchman. I serve as an elder at Faith Bible Fellowship Church of York, and I'm on staff there as well. And so part of that ministry, that's what kind of keeps my feet planted on terra firma. And of course, so does my family. And we've got 4 kiddos, 2 boys, 2 girls, my wife and I have, and we've got one on the way. So that's us.
Wow, y'all are
and looking
busy.
forward to we are. And we're looking forward to the conversation.
Cool. And, let me say that, last time I checked the analytics, we have an audience in over 140 countries. So you are getting the word out there today for sure.
All right.
So you have spoken about the Patriot Party's recent call to defend free speech and shape America's future, saying it connects deeply to conversations happening in Christian communities nationwide. Could you please explain that?
Freedom of speech is such an important issue at this time. It's something that comes directly from the Christian worldview. Honestly, we're starting to see that as the Christian worldview erodes in our society, so does freedom of expression, freedom of conscience. And look, there's a secular version of freedom of conscience rather that really just is about the individual expressing him or herself and fully trying to actualize his innermost feelings, and that's not the biblical approach to that issue. The biblical approach to that issue is to recognize that each individual, because they stand individually before God and will have to give an account individually, that means that the state can't bind the conscience. The church is limited in its authority over its people as well. Ultimately, each individual stands before God, and so out of that worldview and understanding comes our First Amendment and those sorts of things. But we're seeing that get shut down on college campuses. We're seeing that happen in the corporate world today as well. And we see it happen globally as well. We have missionaries serving in parts of the world where it's illegal to convert to Christianity, or it's illegal to be not a Christian. You know, you can usually be a Christian, but if you're the type of Christian that shares his faith or her faith, then you're likely to get in trouble as well. And so not only do we need to bring the message of Christ to the world and bring it to bear on our culture, but we also need to press it enough to the point where it bears fruit, and the fruit of that would be a recognition of the importance of a biblical understanding of liberty of conscience, so that a foundation is laid for future generations to be able to freely spread not only the message of Christ directly, but all of the implications of life under his rule. So now is an important time to get that message out. Obviously, in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination, we're seeing a lot of fighting happen over who gets to have the loudest voice, the loudest platform within the conservative political movement and in the nation in general, who gets to say what, who's allowed to say what. And I'm convinced that we need more speech, and we need more free speech and not less.
Absolutely. Let me give you a little bit of history that most people don't have. This is really a kind of an untold since this movement started. Before the birth of this movement, which I'm proud to say that the movement is the first comprehensive, nonpartisan civic initiative in American history to align the legislative process, the media, and the people under one unifying principle, which is the Constitution. Before that, it started out as unbiased news reporting with a conservative perspective. We did live streams on YouTube. We had we were growing exponentially. 25 for a new channel, 2,500 people a month, over 1 million views a month, and we started doing lives because they started censoring our videos. And this was during when they really went hard on that misinformation campaign because we were citing our sources. I mean, we had like the Attorney General of Florida who said something, but they would take it down for misinformation, and they were attacking us. And then we started doing lives, and we had an average of about 10,000 people for each live, and it wasn't culminating into my analytics. And so I contacted them. As soon as I contacted them and they gave me a closer look, I went from 10,000 to 10 for 8 months, and then I just gave up the channel on YouTube and TikTok. And it's a bad. I mean, that's part of the whole misinformation is the misinformation campaign.
Yeah, that's right. And you're seeing it happen again across social media. And look, we're enjoying a little bit of a reprieve from it now, but that could happen again at any point. And depending on who owns a lot of these companies as well, you might be able to get out certain messages, but not others, right? And what we need is as many of those types of restrictions on speech lifted as possible. Obviously not permitting obscenity. I'm not a free speech absolutist in that sense. I think, we need to keep pornographic content away from children and things like that. But especially in the realm of social media and getting out certain opinions, whether it's about your government or any other government, that's the marketplace. That's the marketplace of ideas. That's the new market, open public square. You can't go to the open marketplace in your city today and shout and be heard and influence people. That happens online. We have a virtual public square now, and we need that space protected. We wouldn't be where we're at currently politically in the country and culturally if it weren't for Elon Musk purchasing X. And you could argue there's problems with the algorithm. I've had some weird problems this week. I'm seeing all sorts of Hindus talking to me that I would have never interacted with before. These things go through spurts, obviously, and it's far from perfect. But that regime of suppressing information in the name of misinformation, that seems to have lifted a little bit. We need to make those changes permanent as possible. We need to make sure that just when the next election cycle comes, when the next person comes into power, that we don't lose those same channels of communication so that we can rally movements and we can speak to who we need to be talking to and not just, each of us talking to our own little private echo chambers.
You're absolutely right there. And I have to comment on the whole worldwide thing because the way we view this change, and I'm sure it's the way you view your change, is that, we America first, not America only, because America innovates. America found that they are the leaders in innovation and forward thinking. So, that's one of the reasons that we really try to get out there to the world, because if we're able to pass our Constitutional Quality Control Board legislation, then, we have a feeling that a lot of governments will follow suit worldwide.
Yeah, we need America to set the tone for the globe in that respect. Look at what's happening in the UK. You're getting police knocking on your door for posting things on, not even hardcore right-wing things on social media, but things just questioning the influence of Islam and things that are a little bit politically incorrect. And you're having authorities step in, and in some cases you are starting to see that in our culture and context as well. We've had people arrested for memes that were allegedly election interference. That's happened, but really, if we are not setting the tone on a global stage for what freedom of information, for what freedom of speech looks like, no other country is going to set that tone. We lead the world. And I would also say that in our culture, if Christians and if the church aren't also the ones banging that drum the loudest, then we're going to have other forces take over the influence, and they're going to grab the steering wheel as well. So we need to understand this. We need to recognize that we stand on the shoulders of giants, of generations of tradition that gives us this deep conviction in the Western psyche about freedom of conscience, about personal liberty, not freedom to do whatever you want to whomever you want, but true personal liberty, which also means accepting responsibility. It means speaking kindly, right? All of those things go with it. But we stand on top of this great body of tradition. And because of that, we need to be on the vanguard of promoting that in the eyes of a watching world. And that's important politically. That's important spiritually as well.
You're absolutely right. And people, I think in the spirit of the Constitution, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else, on most things, people should be allowed to do it. You said something about the UK. I remember reporting last year where a woman got arrested for saying silent prayers. Got arrested twice and then had to pay a 12,000 euro fine and a public apology for saying silent prayers. We let it slide a little bit, and other countries take it way further. So we've got to stop it and set that example for other countries.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that makes me not only does it make my blood boil, that frightens me because we tend to be 20, 30 years behind the culture of the UK. And there's certain cities in the US where if you try to do something like that in front of an abortion facility, you'll probably get a similar reaction, just depending on the relationship between that abortion provider and law enforcement in that place, right? We need people who are willing to step out in those ways and press the legal system to make sure that there is precedent on our side, on the side of freedom, on the side of bold Christian public witness. You need people willing to take that risk. The problem is if one person gets detained, whether it's in the UK or in the US, but somebody gets into some legal jeopardy over for on this side of the pond, exercising their First Amendment rights, then there's thousands of people who don't even want to step out there at all. They don't want to take any action. We need people that are willing to be the example and force the system's hand to allow those sorts of things and to take whatever limited amount of political influence and power that we have as believers or as conservatives or both, and wield that for the good of our neighbor and not be afraid of engaging that system and process.
Okay, let me ask your opinion on something. You kind of sparked something in my head, and I want to get your opinion. So, kind of per the spirit of the Constitution, the states are supposed to have a little more leeway. It's when the federal government tries to step in and make it nationwide. Therefore, if you want to live in a liberal state, that's fine. If you want to live in a conservative state, that's fine. You have options, kind of like the abortion thing. The states decide. Do you think it would be a good idea if we're able to pass this legislation, then to start pushing for it in states to have, state quality control, constitutional quality control boards?
I think that honestly, we've lost the federalist understanding of the relationship between the federal and state governments a long time ago in this country. And so as much as I'm in favor of states' rights on certain issues, abortion would be the exception to that. I think it's a moral issue. I don't think there's any reason that a state should permit abortion under any circumstances. That should be fairly straightforward. But I do think that in certain ways, the conservative impulse tends to be, well, let's restrain the power of the federal government. Let's allow states to do a little bit more. But in this case, we have so many states that are ideologically divided against each other. The gulf between red and blue states becomes wider and wider. The result of all of that is that you probably do need to ask states to take similar measures. There needs to be some continuity there. You shouldn't be able to cross state borders and all of a sudden be under the thought police in one jurisdiction where 5 miles back that way you were under a completely different set of thought crimes, right, or lack thereof. We really need across the board a comprehensive understanding of what freedom of speech means and what it doesn't mean. And I don't see any reason why states shouldn't adopt that for themselves as well. The reality is that it's not just a state government or even a federal government that controls what's happening. It's this complex apparatus of government and bureaucracies and NGOs, media, education. All of those groups of elites tend to collude together to establish whatever the acceptable narrative is in our culture. And you see analogs of that in overseas places as well. And so it's important to make sure that at every stratum, every level of society, certain freedoms are protected there. And again, just to say the perspective that we have on this, we're not a political organization, but we are a spiritual enterprise to bring the good news of Jesus to the whole world. And we run into all sorts of formal and informal formal limitations on speech. It's not just when the top-down level of government, the highest levels of government in a foreign nation say you can't talk about this particular religious issue, that doors close for us. It's also all of the soft forms of cancellation that also make it difficult for our missionaries. So applying that to our context as well, I think we need to be on the lookout for threats against speech at every level of society for the good of our neighbor.
Well said. Well said. So, as the author of Striving for the Faith and co-author of Missions by the Book, you unpack why you believe slogans like diversity is our strength, keep Americans divided, and how Christian missions can unite citizens under a higher truth. Please explain.
Yeah, absolutely. What those two books share in common is really trying to take this global vision that God gives to Christians to be a part of this task. Jesus sends out his disciples to make disciples of all nations, baptizing in the name of the Father and the Son and the Spirit, teaching them to obey everything that he commanded them, right? Jesus gives a global task to his church. But what does that mean for me individually as a believer, whether I live in the States or elsewhere, but just for myself as an American, how do I engage that? And so Missions by the Book, the purpose of that is to give the mission back to the local church. We shouldn't take that mission that we've been given and just outsource that to nonprofits or to parachurch ministries or NGOs or other humanitarian organizations or to the so-called experts of missiology. As important as some of those disciplines are, the Great Commission is given to the Church of Jesus Christ. Churches need to be the ones holding missionaries accountable, sending them out to preach Christ boldly, plant healthy churches, and ultimately be salt and light in those cultures for the sake of Christ and applying his word to all of life so that the message can multiply in its impact. And then striving for the faith is very much just a devotional journey, asking that on even a deeper and more personal level, not just what can my church do for the Great Commission, what do I need to do? And look, not every person is called to go. I'm a believer in having senders and goers. Just like in the military, you have people on the front line, but you also have 10 times as many people on the supply side and at home base holding the rope for those types of people. We need also a strong church here in the U.S. in order not only to sustain global missions, but to continue the mission on the home front as well. Because we're not going to be in a position to be a shining city on a hill with the gospel if we don't have our own house in order as well. And so we need to be on mission in our personal lives. We need to be leading ourselves well. We need to be leading our families to the knowledge of Christ. We need to certainly be engaged in our churches, in our communities, and only out of the overflow of getting those things right will we be able to do greater things in terms of gospel influence nationally and globally as well for that task that the Lord's given us.
Yeah, and with what I read about NGOs in South America and kids and stuff, I'd feel much more comfortable with the church having a handle on that than just some random corporation that won a bid because they knew somebody in the government.
Sure. I just wrapped up submitting a manuscript to my publisher. One of the things that is mentioned in that book is the story of Renee Bach, which she's a young female that started a nonprofit and was basically self-sent as a missionary to a country in Africa without a lot of oversight, and the result of that was lots of medical malpractice and controversy. And I'm sure she had wonderful and pure motives, but even under the best circumstances, there's some NGOs that are corrupt, but even under the best circumstances with good nonprofit organizations made by wonderful folks, ran by wonderful folks who love Jesus, they love other people, all the sorts of things that you want to see, there's still an expertise gap, and having local churches with qualified leaders, pastors, shepherds, elders, deacons involved in overseeing programs and ministries, that's a key piece of it as well. But also taking that away from the influence of governments and of society's elites. Anytime you grow an NGO to a certain level, you're going to have to be in friendly cooperation with various governments and other public center entities. And part of that's unavoidable just to do business in the world that we live in. But ultimately, our job is not to be of the world and fully involved in the world system. Our job is to stand apart from it as well, because sometimes what we're doing is going to contradict the will of the powers that be. And so, again, putting missions into the hands of local churches, working with parachurch organizations like ours to send missionaries, that's a key part of it. Ultimately, bringing the task back to those who are called and appointed by God to stand, preach the gospel, and leave the consequences of that obedience to Him.
Well, I mean, just looking at it from a business standpoint, there's no substitute for experience and capital. Looking at it from my standpoint, when we launch our nonprofit, we start doing civic education with youth across America. I'm going to want to partner with churches. Of course, we're trying to build a coalition of America First companies, associations, things of that sort, and any association that wants the betterment of America, or in essence the world, is an America First company or association in my mind.
Yeah, it's wonderful to serve, for myself, just personally, to reflect for a minute, to serve with an organization that you don't have to wonder about, am I doing any good? And I know some people have ordinary jobs and they wonder if they're doing any good. And the reality is you are doing good, and you can be doing good. Number one, you can do any job for the glory of God. Number two, you can take your earnings from that and do good with those earnings. But you can also be a light, be making disciples through all of the relationships and the network of opportunities that come to you through your work. Sometimes you can leverage the structure of the business itself to accomplish good in the world. There's all sorts of ways. There's a great book called Great Commission Companies that you should take a look at. For us, I have the immense privilege of knowing that all the sorts of things that we do here ultimately are about getting more people out there in the world proclaiming Christ, and that does have an effect on society. I mean, you mentioned America First. I mean, I'm somebody who, of course, that resonates with me because I'm American, and if I was German, I would want to be Germany first. If I was, from Sweden, I would want to be Sweden first, right? Somebody who's Indian should be India first, right? That's sort of common sense, but the reality is that Scripture gives us this framework for loving our neighbors, right? And as we're bringing the gospel and the fruits of gospel living to our communities and to our broader nations, the result will be blessings for those peoples. Not that life becomes perfect, but as Christ is obeyed, and that's lived out in all of life, ultimately that is for the good of different nations and cultures and peoples. And so if you love your people, and if you love your nation, your country, the best way to ensure their long-term blessing is to sow seeds of gospel faith and obedience in the place where you live and serve, whether that's where you're from or whether it's a place that you've been sent to far off.
Absolutely, and that's why we want to start teaching American exceptionalism again, because it doesn't matter where you're from. If you're from Germany, if you're from Ukraine, that you ought to be teaching exceptionalism for the country that you're from, so you create pride and patriotism. And I really think that's where we've lost a lot of things, and I think the church run hand in hand, kind of like a lot of people to begin with. At least my understanding is there was kind of a clash between church and science, but then it was like they kind of go hand in hand. One proves the other, proves the other, proves the other. So it's kind of the same way with this. They coincide, they go hand in hand.
Yeah, and there's a few different things, to react to in what you're saying. You talk about something like American exceptionalism. I mean, ultimately, what I see happening, if you're to zoom out from history, if you're to zoom out from politics and culture at like 30,000 feet, what you see is there's a general sentiment of being anti-Western, which certainly equates to anti-American or anti-European. Sometimes this gets mixed into racial issues, but it's not about white people per se. I think that's a distraction. But this whole anti-Western slant, I think, is a proxy war against Christianity, because in the West you do see the fruits, especially of Protestantism, but Western Christianity in general, the way that it's established societies and cultures with relative justice, with relative stability, far from perfect. But read a book like Dominion by Tom Holland, read a book by Glenn Scrivener called The Air We Breathe. You recognize that you don't get the West the way it exists today apart from Jesus of Nazareth rising and dying 2,000 years ago, dying and rising rather 2,000 years ago, and ascending to heaven, ruling the world and beginning to change the world as his followers start to obey him and spread his word. And so the West, and of course there's Christians in the East as well. I'm not trying to say, the West is a superior culture inherently, but you do see the fruit of the gospel, especially over the last 1,000 years throughout the West, on a particularly dramatic display. And so whenever I see see forces, be they in the business world or political or wherever, that want to dismantle the West, it's hard not to wonder if there's not an agenda against Christianity in there underneath all of that. That's why we need a robust public Christian worship globally, but especially in our own country and context as well. One that is not only focused on bringing the message of salvation, as important as that is, but also the effects of life lived under the crown rights of King Jesus.
Okay. So please help our audience with new ways to connect faith, mission, and the American ideal.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I think is important for us to think in terms of is the order of loves. You heard J.D. Vance reference this earlier in the year, the Ordo Amoris. And this is the theme of a book, again, that we have coming out in January with Founders Press. But right now, it seems like there's a conflict between those who want to think globally and those who are hardcore, committed localists, right? And I understand the source of that tension. In many ways, I think we have far too much focus on things that are far off, unattainable. In Proverbs, Scripture itself says that the fool's eyes are set on the ends of the earth. So on the one hand, Jesus calls us to make disciples of all nations, but he also makes clear through the whole voice of Scripture that you're not supposed to do that in the sort of way that's just sort of reaching after these abstract ideals. You have to love flesh and blood people that are in front of you as well, and not just think about things that are beyond your sphere of influence. The Apostle Paul says, I refuse to boast beyond my sphere of influence. He was a world traveler, but he was also concerned about being faithful with wherever he was at any given moment, right? So you have this tension on the one hand. On the other hand, I understand why people react to that and go to this direction of, I'm only going to focus on my family. I'm only going to focus on my community, my types of people, my tribe, my church. And the reality is we do need to build strong boroughs, Christian boroughs, communities, interconnected families of families that are committed to following Christ together through the way they educate their children, through where they invest their money in business ventures and all those sorts of things. We need sturdy communities as well, especially if we're going to send out missionaries from them. We need sturdy communities here on the home front as well. But those two poles of the current conversation don't have to be at opposite ends. They don't have to be in tension with each other. You can't reconcile them because they're already friends. There shouldn't be any enmity between them at all. And the idea of the order of loves doesn't mean that I only love what's right in front of me and nothing else. It means that I begin loving the world as God's called me to and loving all of humanity as God has called me to. I begin with the people right in front of me. And then the overflow of that, if I'm faithful, is that the Lord gives me more and more. And as I'm proving myself faithful in the small things, the overflow of my love within my church, my community, can be love for the nations and action among the nations as well. I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I think we can love where we're from, our culture, seek to preserve what's good and true and beautiful in our particular cultural inheritance. Much of that is a blessing from God. I think we are accountable to steward those things and use them for the good of the world. I don't think that it's helpful to never think about what's happening outside of our own walls, but I don't think it's helpful either to be focused on abstractions and meeting needs in faraway places and loving the idea of lost and starving and dying people that I see on the back of a brochure, but people that I never really interact with. Meanwhile, I'm letting my own household run totally out of control. Our own country is in disarray. I think biblically it's important for us to do what we can in each sphere and trust God that as we're faithful with first things, he'll expand the borders of our impact. So I think, first of all, just recognizing the importance of having the right order of loves and seeing it all the way through, being global Christians, but also acting with what's in front of us right now.
And I think that aligns perfectly with what I was saying earlier. I kind of got a little tongue-tied, but America first, not America only, because we lead by example. That goes right along with it. We lead by example, and then we move on. But we get first dibs.
We certainly lead by example. I think we underestimate as Americans the whole world looks to America for better or for worse. We really are still in many ways. Obviously, you can point to China, and there's rising superpowers like Brazil, but you still look to America. We really are. At least the legacy has been leading, for the last at least 80 years as the world superpower. Especially emerging out of World War II, especially after the fall of the British Empire. And that means something particularly important for the American church. That means that within that, if all eyes are on America just at a secular global level, then how much more so American Christians, we're not better than anyone, but to whom much is given, much is required. We've been given so much. We need to be the type of people that are willing to act and not just trade away our birthright and squander all of the resources and blessings we've been given.
And I was actually on a podcast myself the other day, and we were talking about how sometimes people immigrating legally and illegally into this country, they are more patriotic and they appreciate what America provides more than the people that live here. And I told the podcaster, I said, to me, I would think that's probably because. If it's sunny every day, you don't appreciate the sun. But if you have to deal with hard times and it gets cloudy and then it's sunny, you appreciate the sun. And I think that, and I know there's people in America that have it bad, but I said on that podcast, I said they don't have it Ethiopia bad. Even the people in America don't have it Ethiopia bad. So you got people come from other countries that can appreciate it, but then the people living here don't appreciate it, because I think they've always had sunny skies.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was Cotton Mather that said that, and this is true of Israel's history, this is true of our history, this is true for any society that goes through ups and downs through the course of multiple generations. But it's that faithfulness, obedience, begets or gives rise to prosperity, but then the daughter devours the mother. The idea simply being that, as you are generally conforming your life, your ways, your society to, broadly speaking, God's moral law, then you will generally experience blessing from that. Again, there's all sorts of edge cases and exceptions, but then it's similar to another statement that's been memed, and I think rightly so. Hard times create hard men. Hard men create good times, and good times create soft men, and soft men create hard times again, right? We see this cyclical process. And so for us, we're at a time when we've had it so good for so long that now we've taken it for granted, and now much of it seems like it's beginning to slip away from us. And as much furor and controversy as there is right now over things like migration, I was on a panel this morning with a lady who made a very astute observation, and this is the best possible motive to immigrate to a place like the United States. In theory, you're looking at what we have, and you're seeing, again, compared to maybe where you're from, things are a lot better here, generally speaking. Not if you go to Kensington, not if you go to parts of LA, but in general, middle America, things here are still extremely blessed by God. God has been extremely kind to us. And so theoretically, you would want to come here to experience that blessing. And so it's incumbent upon us to live up to the principles that by God's grace have made this country incredibly blessed. We are not entitled to those blessings. The only reason we've gained so many of those blessings is because of past generations of faithfulness and bold witness. We need to live into that if we want to walk in God's general blessing again. Otherwise, the effect will be sort of like the people in the wilderness in the Old Testament, crying out for meat. Well, then they get all of the meat, they get all of the provisions, all of the blessings, literally rain down from above, herds full of quail, skies dropping with these meat birds, and then God strikes them dead while they're chewing the food itself. We certainly don't, in other words, want our prosperity to actually turn around and be the means of judgment against us as it continues to sort of fatten us for the slaughter. We need to take these things, seize the moment, and seek to increase our faithfulness to God in light of how faithful and kind He's been to us, and undeservedly so.
Yeah, I've said it before. If we don't learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it. So, Alex, is there anything we missed? Anything else you want to talk to this audience about?
No, I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity. I think we're living in incredibly difficult times. Even after some of the things with the election this week, and you see the rise of influence of Islam publicly. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons maybe to be discouraged. I'm encouraged, though, because at the same time that I see all the controversy politically taking place, I do see more and more people within the church waking up, realizing that we need to be men and women of action. We need to seize the moment. You look to the assassination of Charlie Kirk and you realize we need a country full of Charlie Kirks, people that are willing to connect the dots between culture and worldview and bold public witness, and not wasting your life no matter how long or how tragically short it may be. And I think that if we have more people thinking like that, striving for the faith, to go with the book title there, if we have more people, Philippians 1:27, striving together for the faith, then the net effect of that will be that we'll be able to not only send missionaries overseas, but that we'll have Christians engaged in the legislative process, standing up for free speech or standing up for the unborn. We'll have Christians engaged in starting business ventures, the sorts of things that can provide for those in the church that are falling on hard economic times, that can help raise excesses of funds to support church planters and missionaries. And you see this whole virtuous cycle gets completed and created out of building these strong Christian interconnected networks, strong Christian boroughs, when we're living boldly, when we're living faithfully, when we're taking whatever the Lord's given us and seeking to multiply those talents before Him. And so there's a lot to be discouraged about, and I think we need to have some serious conversations about what's coming next for our country in the coming months and years. But ultimately, I have hope because I see more and more people waking up to the reason that they need to be living with purpose and intentionality.
I think most reasonable people, people that listen to facts, not fiction, and don't think that feelings are facts. I think that most people would agree that whatever denomination, whatever faith you are, the country was much better off when we had more of it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This constitutional order, the saying goes, obviously, was created for a moral and religious people, and it's not suitable to govern any other. We need not just more of God in general, although certainly fearing God can result in certain social goods. But we really need to, as a country, bow the knee to the Lord Jesus Christ. And until we are each individually, personally repenting of personal sin, and then also together with our families, repenting of what our families have been guilty of and moving out again in concentric spheres, until we're taking that seriously, doing business with God through the cross of Christ, and then having been forgiven, living as free people that are untouchable and unassailable because we have been, what was the shirt that Charlie Kirk was wearing at the time he was assassinated? Live free, right? We
Oh
need to
man, I
be
wasn't paying
living as
attention to the
free men.
shirt. That was
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. And there is so much truth to that message as well. And so that's what I'm hoping to see. That's certainly what I want for myself and for my children. And I think if we all live a little bit into that bigger story and maybe lean a little bit away from our personal fears and worldly concerns and obligations, I think we'll see the net effect of that has a powerful effect on this country.
Well said. Alex, could you please stay in the studio for a few minutes while I wrap this up? I'd like to have a few words with you before you leave.
Sounds
All
good.
right. Let's all thank Alex Kocman for joining the Patriot Party. And remember to check his website link in the description of this episode and check out his books. To all of you out there, stay safe. And don't forget to catch our Saturday morning show at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time, where truth meets every corner of the news.